What's up? It's your girl Onyx Isis. Once again, back for another book review, and today I'm reviewing Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, the digital version. As always, I'm reviewing the books from the perspective of an African internationalism. And African internationalism is a socialist theory that helps us understand the birth of capitalism as a result of the enslavement and colonization of African people and the theft of our resources. And it's a theory that pushes us to practice and saying that if capitalism was developed because of the theft and exploitation of African people, then we have to do everything in our power to achieve power again, recapture our resources, in whatever way, shape, or form that is. And so that is something that we wholeheartedly uphold in our movement. And this theory was created by Omali Yeshitela, who is the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and the chairman of the African Socialist International, which is the party represented throughout the world. If you want to know more about African internationalism and the African People's Socialist Party, please go to apspuhuru.org and I'll drop the link below. So, to the book. Um, how Europe Underdeveloped Africa. First of all, I want to say a little bit about Walter Rodney. And Rodney was a political activist, was a educator and a scholar who was killed in a car bombing in 1980 in Guyana. And I think it's really helpful to know about this political situation in Guyana as well as the political situation in the world in the 70s and 60s was really one of African people trying to eke out power, particularly in the Caribbean in the 1980s. It was a lot of like social movement, like in Guyana and Jamaica and Grenada, like Cuba, all of these places in the Caribbean were like moving toward getting national political independence from their colonizers, which were France and England and things like that. And so, and some of them even achieving, liberation, like Grenada. Um, and so it's really important for us to talk about that and also talk about the books that I've been talking about in relation to how African people have been affected by it, but also like recognizing that African experiences is a part of like the whole worldwide experience and that one does not happen without the effect of the other. And so, what I really appreciated about this book, Rodney's book, is this really important timeline of Africa, how it was developing before Europeans got there, how societies were structured, how everything was not connected. Everybody was not in one utopia. Nobody, there were different tribes and groups and things like that, and nobody really had an African identity. And where the Europeans landed in one part of Africa, nobody knew about the Europeans in the other. So there was no real connective fiber so that you can understand like what was happening, in Guinea-Bissau before it was called Guinea-Bissau, and all of these things, how Portuguese was so violent and vigilant. And then it also talks about like how Africa was on the cusp of European infiltration and the cusp of enslavement of African people and how those little things just started to develop. And even though this is a really academic book, it's a really nice read. It has like a sort of like fictional sort of flow to it. You are pulled in to the tellings of Rodney. You are if you're an African, you're right there in the village with the Africans trying to figure things out, and you like, if I was there, I wouldn't have had that done. You like, you're pulled in to the telling of this history as I was as an African person. Um, and what I really understood most of all, mostly because of the leadership and teachings of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and just what he has been drilling into us for years in terms of, European identity and the European nationhood developing as a result of the attack on Africa, whereby Europe rescued itself. It was dying, diseased, starving. It was really not a good place, and how they were, that because of those conditions, people just had to like go out into the world that they thought was flat to go find out if something was better, try to get gold, try to get something to pull back into Europe. And that before that there was not this European identity. There was not like an English identity. There were different people and different pockets of groups in these countries that didn't form like this national identity. But through the plunder, through the exploitation, through the enslavement of Africans, did these European countries become a European identity, have a national patriotism that was rooted in the capture of African people and in the theft of African resources. And by default, now that we saw where African people were still developing, trying to figure out, trying to do things, developing arts and sciences and things like that, and agriculture to make their lives better. At the point where Europe infiltrates Africa, attacks Africa, now the things that we were learning for ourselves to develop ourselves, our societies, were now being pulled into the development of Europe and Europeans and United States, I mean the Americas at the time. And so no longer were we developing for ourselves. Now the history has shifted, whereby now all of our labor, all of our resources, all of our time was focused on taking care of these Europeans and their survival. And that's no different today. Right now, we're talking about Africa as a third world economy, or an economy that is underdeveloped. But the reality is that capitalism requires Africa to be underdeveloped, um, and in a state of disrepair, in order for them to continue to function and breathe. So that's why we call capitalism parasitic capitalism. One cannot exist without the other. Capitalism cannot exist without the resources of African people, the theft of African resources and other resources that have been stolen from different places around the world. And so it's a parasitic economy. And where Rodney in the book identifies capitalism as a progressive benefit to the world, because of his Marxist teachings, and Marxism is a communist way of thought that says that capitalism was beneficial to the forward motion of society. As an African internationalist, we were taught that's not the case. How can capitalism be the benefit of society when we have proven, even Rodney has proven, that capitalism and the development of capitalism came as a result of the destruction of African self-determination and the destruction of African self-preservation. And so Africans were pulled into slavery. Africans were pulled in colonial, feudal agriculture development, and pulled into servitude to white people. And as a result, Africa is not developed. Africa is nowhere near where it could be at this moment, based on the resources that are on the continent and the intellectual genius of many African people. So, and capitalism is still a worldwide system today, and it still hasn't progressed Africa or African people in any particular way. And so I think it's really important to say that even with this contradiction of him saying that capitalism was a progressive thing, that as a result, that his historical timeline was still really beneficial, and anybody reading this book would be so enlightened, and so and it would be so helpful to you. And that doesn't take anything away from Rodney, other than the fact that he was a Marxist and he should have been an African internationalist. But and so anyway, this is a really, really great read, and I just really appreciate just him having the forethought to like really lay it out. There's so many other great historians too to read, and I've read John Henry Clark and some other historians as well. And I just want to just big up Rodney for this book. So I'll see you next time, as we are talking about another book. I don't know what that book is yet. I'll figure it out. I got lots that I've read, and I hope you enjoyed this review. And as an aside, I lead a African women's book club, and because of COVID-19, we've been pushed online. So if you're interested, African women, Black women, in being in that virtual book club on March 3rd, Sunday, March 3rd, from 1 to 3 Eastern Standard Time, I'm gonna drop the link below, and you can register and get the information for how to connect. I'll see you next time.